Chapter 6. The Maid. The robot had a simple home in the forest. It was a dome made of wood and rock and mud, with a low doorway at one end. Inside, the walls were lined with stone benches, and in the center of the space was a fire pit for those cold winter nights. Outside, the dome was surrounded by a lush garden of wild flowers and herbs and berry bushes. Rose called her home the nest. Bright Bill and his maid would soon be arriving at the nest, and Rose wanted everything to be perfect. A cloud of dust billowed out the door as she tidied up the interior. And then came Bright Bill's voice from the garden. "We're here, Ma." Rose crouched and stepped out of the doorway. It was a bright, beautiful day, and sunlight streaked down through the canopy of leaves and branches. Among the sun-dappled flowers stood Bright Bill and a female goose. "Ma, this is Glimmering." Bright Bill motioned to the goose at his side. "Hello, Glimmering," said the robot. "It is lovely to meet you." "Please call me Glimmer," said the goose. "Of course, I've seen you around the island, but it's so nice to actually meet you." Glimmer fluttered up to Rose's shoulder and gave her a big hug. "What should I call you?" said Glimmer. "Rose? Ma? Miss Robot? Please call me Rose." The three of them spent the afternoon together. They talked about Glimmer's family and the loss of her parents. Later, Rose lightened the mood with stories of Bright Bill from when he was young. The conversation flowed smoothly until Rose brought up one particular subject. "I have prepared the nest, and you may move in whenever you like," said the robot to the geese. "It'll be wonderful to have your company." The geese looked at each other. You see, Ma," Bright Bill was struggling to find the right words. "Glimmer and I thought we'd live in our own nest, like other geese." The robot thought for a moment and said, "It is only natural for two mates to want some privacy." "Thank you for understanding," said Glimmer. "I will build you a new nest," said Rose. "I know exactly how to weave together grasses and twigs. It'll be my gift to you to celebrate your union." The geese looked at each other. "Yeah, well, about that," Bright Bill was struggling to find the right words again. "Glimmer and I want to build our own nest in our own way." "But we appreciate the kind offer," said Glimmer. "You're not upset, are you, Ma?" said Bright Bill. "Who? Me? Upset? Do not be silly. I completely understand that you would want to start your life together by building a nest. If you ever need anything from me, all you have to do is ask." Chapter 7. The Passing Flocks. Birds often stopped by the island to rest their wings during flights across the ocean. They'd find a comfortable place to relax, and once they'd recover their strength, they'd continue on their way. So when a flock of seagulls approached the island one afternoon, there was nothing strange about it. What was strange, however, was that seagulls flew right past the island without stopping to rest. It wasn't long before a flock of geese flew past the island without stopping. A little later, a flock of terns flew past, and then a flock of vultures flew past. As more flocks flew past, a sense of worry settled over the island creatures. And when a flock of ducks passed overhead, Bright Bill and Glimmer took flight to see what was going on. They flew alongside the ducks, asking questions and listening to answers. Then the two geese came gliding back down to the edge of the pond where a crowd was waiting. Glimmer let out a heavy breath and shared the troubling news. "That poor seal was right," she began. "The poison tide is coming. The ducks said it'll be here tomorrow. Nobody knows what it is. They only know that it's spreading south through the ocean, harming every living thing in its path. The reason why so many birds have been passing us by is that they're fleeing from the poison tide." Animals glared at the robot, and Fink growled. "You said we had nothing to worry about." "It seems I was wrong," said Rose. "I am very sorry." "According to the ducks, there is someone who can help," said Bright Bill. "They said there is an ancient shark who is wise and powerful. If we can contact her, we might be able to stop the poison tide. The ancient shark lives somewhere in the north, but nobody knows exactly where to find her." Animal voices called out, "Who cares about an old shark? How we will survive the poison tide? What are we going to do?" "This is what we are going to do," said the robot. "We are going to help our friends. Seabirds, otters, fish, crabs, and all the other coastal creatures are in grave danger. They must be evacuated at once." Chapter 8. The Evacuation. The flock of geese fanned out across the island and alerted everyone that the poison tide was coming. Otters raced through the waves, telling their neighbors the news. Crabs scuttled down into the depth of the ocean. Fish who'd spent their whole lives in those reefs abandoned their homes and swam out to open water. Many animals came down to the coast to help with the evacuation, but as the hours passed, the animals needed to rest. The robot, however, did not. Night fell and the stars came out, and there was Rose wading through the shallows, her headlights turning from side to side as she warned the coastal creatures to leave. Chapter 9. The Poison Tide. Towering above the island was a tall, rugged mountain. Waterfalls cascaded from its ledges. Clumps of wild flowers rustled in the breeze. In places, the mountainside had crumbled, leaving behind sheer cliffs. A vulture emerged from a hollow in the cliffs. She stretched her wide wings and glided off to search for crevasses. Floating on the wind, she rose higher and higher until she spotted something unusual. To the north, it looked like the ocean was gently shimmering in the sunlight, but the sky was full of clouds. The shimmering water could only mean one thing. "The poison tide is here!" screeched the vulture. Animals began hurrying to the northern slopes to see the poison tide for themselves. Reader, you and I might not have noticed that patch of gently shimmering water, but the animals noticed. After all, animals are incredibly sensitive to their environment. They can sense a storm long before it appears, and the poison tide was like an underwater storm sweeping through the sea. Below the northern slopes, Rose was still hard at work in the shallows. She had spent the whole night out there, trying to help every coastal creature get to safety, but she was running out of time. The robot plucked sea stars and sea urchins and sea snails from the water and dropped them into rock pools along the shore. Then she waded back into the shallows to search for more. Behind her, the crowd of island animals started shouting, "I can see the poison tide." "Yes, there it is. It's gotten so close." The robot's computer brain contained thousands of different programs, and the most important were her survival instincts. When a wave of poison tide came rolling to shore, her survival instincts blared in her head, urging her to get out of the water. But then she heard something else, frightened squeaks. In all of confusion, the otter pup had climbed onto a small rock that stood up from the shallows. Now the pup was frozen with fear as the wave of poison tide tumbled toward him. Rose charged over to young otter as fast as she could go, but beneath the surface the seabed was covered in slick stones, and she kept sliding and stumbling and slipping. Nervous voices hollered down from the hills, "The poison tide is right here! Hurry up, Rose! Go, Mama, go!" Just before the wave reached the otter, Rose grabbed him and leaped away with all her strength. They arced up from the shallows, over a rocky cove, and landed on the shore. The otter pup ran to his parents. Everyone was happy to see the otter family reunited, but their happiness didn't last long, because when the crowd turned back to the ocean, they saw that the poison tide was spreading through the water and slowly surrounding the island. Chapter 10. The Changes. The coastal water were thick with a type of seaweed called kelp. Undersea forest of tall leafy stems swayed with the movement of the waves and made a rich habitat for sea creatures. But as the poison tide spread along the coast, dead kelp began washing ashore. Crashing waves sent poison sea spray into the air. Wind then carried the spray inland, where it settled on grasses and flowers and trees, turning them gray and brittle. Land animals who lived near the ocean had no choice but to retreat far into the island. The great meadow was overrun by swarms of mice and snakes and frogs. Sea otters invaded streams and ponds, gobbling up freshwater fish and driving out many of the long-time residents. As fish became harder to find, bears were forced to eat nuts and berries. And that forced the deer and the hares and the squirrels to find other sources of food. Seabirds packed into the wetlands, but they soon gave up and flew across the ocean in search of new homes. Other birds followed. With fewer birds to eat the insects, their population exploded, and the sweet sound of birdsong was replaced with the constant buzzing of scaly little wings. More animals were living in a smaller area, which meant less food and water and shelter for everyone. Species that never should have crossed paths were fighting over territory. The sounds of angry voices filled the air. The dawn truce, that beloved tradition, was abandoned because there was so little trust left between the animals. The island had always been a perfectly balanced environment, but the poison tide was more than it could take.